Welcome to EPG Pathshala. Dear students, today we would be discussing the region of a city. A city is incomplete or is always interacting with its region, and a region is also or interacting or dependent on its region, and vice versa. The region is also interacting and dependent on the city. So in this two-way process of city region, we want to understand, or we want to this module would be discussing the classification, characteristics and the delineation of a region, of a city. Now when we come to the classification and characteristics, we find that the classifications are based on four aspects or parameters. One is the regional economics, what it says, or these are I would say the perspectives. So regional economics, based on regional economics, then based on the scale of a region. Then the classification is also based on stages of economic development, and the last is about the activity status. So now when we come to the first perspective of classification, we find that that is a regional economics. We see that there are three typologies of regions. One is the formal region, which is the homogeneous region. One is the nodal or functional region, that's a heterogeneous region. And next is the planning region or the administrative regions. Looking or trying to understand the characteristics or the definitions of this region, we go one by one. So the first is the formal region. How do we define a formal region? So a formal region is similar, that means it is homogeneous based on various characteristics. So it can be in terms of geophysical similarity can be there, or similarity in terms of economic characteristics, or in terms of social and political characteristics. Now when we look at we can also define it as an area inhabited by people who have one or more characteristics in common. It may be a common language also, like we said previously, socio-political characteristics, or a crop or climatic conditions. So for example, we have the Himalayan range, the northern plains, the Deccan plateau, the Indian desert areas, then eastern Ghats, western Ghats, which are the hilly regions. So they would have some similarity in terms of the characteristics, and therefore these are called homogeneous regions, and this figure shows the location of whatever I was referring to. Now we come to the definition of an heterogeneous region or a functional region. Now what is a heterogeneous region? The region is not similar, but the region is actually has dissimilarities in terms of spatial dissimilarities. Some part of the region is different than the other. Parts of the regions are different. So there are spatial dissimilarities as well as functional dissimilarities. Function wise they are dissimilar, and they are composed of heterogeneous units which are functionally, though they are distinct units, heterogeneous units, but they are interrelated, and therefore and also interdependent with internal flows of people, services, commodities, communication. Though they are dissimilar, but they are all interdependent, and a constant or continuous flow or a continuous network or continuous flow exists in terms of people commuting, services are there, then communication networks are alive. So like that, so this is what a heterogeneous region is. Now but it works as a single unit. It is and therefore if you see, like National Capital Region of Delhi, this drawing shows the location of the The map of India shows the location of the National Capital Region of Delhi. So Delhi is the focal point, and there's this region around which is heterogeneous. As you may be knowing that there are various states, part of various states are included in the National Capital Region, and that's how they are dissimilar, but they are always also interacting, and they are for under one unit. And then we have Mumbai Metropolitan Region, we have Bengaluru Metropolitan Region, as you can see in the drawing, Kolkata Metropolitan Region and Chennai Metropolitan Area. Kolkata Metropolitan Area, Chennai Metropolitan Area. Now, if we really go into the next one, which is the planning region, which is basically from the administrative point of view, the planning region, it is a contiguous area notified by a competent authority under a specific legislation and characterized by nodality, socio-cultural homogeneity, and a homogeneous economic structure. Now, Baudeville defines a planning region as an area displaying some coherence or unit of economic decision. And whereas Classen defines it, or defines a planning region, which he says that must be large enough to take investment decisions of for that region, then must be able to supply its own industry with the necessary labor, should have a homogeneous economic structure, as I said earlier, then it should contain at least one growth point and should have a common approach for solving the problems of overcoming or addressing the challenges of this region. And there are also, in this planning region, we can identify that there are investment regions and spatial regions. As I was referring to investment regions as a part of the planning region, now investment regions are those which are which we call as special investment regions or SIRs, are areas for various purposes. It's used for various purposes. It can be manufacturing or industrial zones. It can be special economic zones, that is SEZs. It can be large transport terminals, airports maybe, then passenger and freight corridors, then and they could be identified under the national acts. And the purpose of these regions are to create large size investment regions or industrial areas, and develop them as global hubs for economic activity, which is supported by world class infrastructure. So that is also one aspect or one component of what we say as administrative regions. And if we see that from this drawing, this is the Dholera special investment region. Though we have many other special investment regions, we have the petroleum complex, the PCPIR near Visakhapatnam. We have the Hazira SIR. We have many SEZs which are there in our country. So these are the examples of some of the investment regions. Now we come to the next perspective, or the next criteria, rather criterion I would say, for classifying a region, which is the scale of a region. Now the regions are, the scale can be, one is that it can be a macro region, which is the biggest. It can be a macro region where you can see if you see National Capital Region of Delhi, can be a good example of macro region. It is about 46, nearly 50,000 square kilometers, and it can be termed as a macro region. As we were discussing that there is from administrative boundaries, the point of view of administrative boundaries, or that perspective, we can talk of National Capital Region for planning perspective. But from if we look at the agroclimatic zones, from the point of view of agroclimatic zones, India has about 15 agroclimatic zones, and as you can see in the drawing, all those agroclimatic zones are mapped. from western Himalayan region to eastern Himalaya, all the Himalayan region, then the Gangetic Plain region, then the eastern plateau and hills, then eastern coastal plains and hills, then the dry region of the west. So like that, there are about 15 agroclimatic zones, so they can also be called as macro regions. So now we come to the meso. The meso is the next, as I said, we come down the hierarchy to the next level, that is, which is, if we define mesoregion, we find that it is the subdivision of a state. In terms of the macro was a state or more than one state. But then in meso we find that it is a subdivision of a state, so comprising of several districts, and then with some identifiable affinity, and can also become a nodal region, provided the combined micro-regions or parts thereof are developed in a complementary manner. So it can be either a cultural or administrative region, a homogeneous physical region, or a nodal region. And we can see that this meso-region is Bangalore. Like we said earlier, Bangalore is Bengaluru, which I earlier referred to, is one of the examples of a meso-region. And the next, we come down the scale, that is the next order or hierarchical in the hierarchy is the micro-region. Now micro-region comes to, we come down to the district level. So it is either the district, that is the lowest territorial unit of planning for regions. It is viable for plan formulation, implementation and monitoring, and it has a compact administration. There are and so we have a district or as the odd subdivision of the district, which can be, but district is generally for regional level, districts are considered as the viable unit for planning. And in India, the micro regions, mainly, for example, the Kamrup region in Assam and Nainital region in Uttarakhand, all these have the are, we can say that yes, they are the examples of micro regions. We come to now the micro minor regions. So this is a subdivision of a district, that is, it can be a block level or a taluka level or a tehsil level, depending upon which part of the country we have our different levels. Terminologies, somewhere it is block, somewhere it is tehsil, somewhere it's taluka. So and it is associated with grassroots planning, also viable. This unit is viable for plan formulation, implementation and monitoring, and there are various block level plans in our country in various regions. So every region can have a block level and block level plans are formulated and for regional development, for balanced regional development. Our next criteria for classifying the region is stages of economic development. So either it can be a developed region, or it can be classified into two parts. One is it can be a developed region and it can be a backward region. So regions can be classified under these two heads. So now what is a developed region? A developed regions are those which have a high rate of accretion in goods and services, and their share of in the GDP of the country is high, relatively higher, and it has also overcome and addressed the challenges which are there in development of the region. For example, this map shows, as you can see, the National Capital Region, the Mumbai Metropolitan Region. They are all developed regions, and these are basically, these examples are all Indian examples. So there are very other examples also, uh, which are global examples, but basically we have focused or concentrated on Indian examples. Now what are backward regions? The backward regions are characterized by low levels of employment or per capita income, then low levels of urbanization and industrialization, lack of infrastructure facilities, adverse geoclimatic conditions, then low investment rate, low literacy level or skill of the population. And as we can see, the Raghuram Rajan panel report on state backwardness in 2013, we find that Odisha, Bihar, Madhya Pradesh, uh, in the drawing also, in the map also you can see that Orissa, Bihar, Madhya Pradesh, Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand, Arunachal Pradesh, Assam, that is our north, and Meghalaya are not part of the northeastern states. Then one of the northeastern states rather, Uttar Pradesh, Rajasthan. So they are stated as backward. Also Lakshadweep and Andaman and Nicobar Islands. Our last criteria for classifying the regions are the activity status. What is the activity status of these regions? So based on the activities, as we said, the activity status, based on the activities, the regions can be classified into either a mineral based region or a manufacturing region, or a cultural region. So now what is a mineral based region? A mineral regions are characterized by rich mineral resources, and they have potential of mineral exploitation. It can promote development in the surrounding regions also due to this presence of minerals. Then these regions also require long-term planning for sustainable development after extraction is no longer a profitable activity. And as you can see, the Raniganj Jharia belt, that is a coal belt, or the Bastar district of Madhya Pradesh, or generally the minerals are located in where the minerals are found where in those areas which are rich in forest reserves also. So forest resources also, you can find that the forest map and the mineral resource map are sometimes are sort of coterminous, and large forest areas also we'll find that there are minerals. So mineral region is that, and now we go to the manufacturing regions, which is talking of so regions which become they also have resources to make them, or as their potential to make them or to qualify as manufacturing regions, but they also have the infrastructure for development. Then they also have government support. Those are the initiatives, or those are the factors which help these areas to become manufacturing regions. But these manufacturing regions also have the potential and the necessary investments to make it a manufacturing regions. And we can see that manufacturing regions in our country are maybe in the, as you can see in the drawing, these are the manufacturing regions of our country. We come to the last category, which is the cultural region. Now cultural regions are characterized by or demarcated on the basis of language and culture primarily, and there is this for example, the South Andaman Islands, there is the Jarawas tribe, or there is this Bodo territorial districts, or so therefore there are certain part of the northeast states which can be also, can also be identified as the cultural regions. Or so therefore any region which is homogeneous in terms of cultural, or not homogeneous rather, which is rich in in culture is can be identified as a cultural region. Our next part or the learning objectives of our of this module is the delineation of a city region. Now the delineation, how do we delineate this region? How do we, though we know that district can be enumerated, but there can be the region is not necessarily restricted to an administrative boundary. It also depends upon the natural features and the connectivity and maybe the river channels, the railway line. So therefore there are various aspects on which, factors on which one can delineate, delineate a region, not necessarily as the administrative boundary. So we see here that the National Resources Committee in 1935 said that regional planning should confine itself to dealing with the physical resources and equipment out of which socio-economic progress arises. So therefore, regional planning had two main foci of interest, that is physical resources and their development. And if we see for us, this region, as I was mentioning before, the development objectives of any region are mainly socio-economic development, and at the same time we should have environmental conservation. Now what are the variables for delineation, as I was referring to earlier? What are how do we delineate a region? We find that for a formal region we have land use characteristics, demographic characteristics, transport infrastructure, social service, public utilities, the functional region we see there's dominance is one of the aspects, cluster of services, hierarchical level of the city. So these are the I would say the criteria or the variables for delineation. Next we go into the flows of people. As we said earlier that the city between the city and the region there are interaction. So now what sort of interaction? So based on these interactions also we can delineate a region, based on the passenger movement, based on the goods movement, from how much distance the people are commuting to the city or going away from the city to the region. So this would basically talk about a floating population. Then the labor markets, from where is the labor people coming. Now people are also floating population, which it would include the people coming or commuting to the city for work, for education purposes, for healthcare maybe. And then there is a cultural affinity, that is for shopping, for major recreational areas. So this would constitute people's movement to and fro from the city. And then there's also goods movement. So the raw material, movement of raw material, the movement of finished goods, then movement of perishable goods like vegetables, milk, egg, meat, daily needs, for our daily needs. So the area or the extent from which supplies come to the city can also be talked of as a regional, that can be also be one of the criteria for delineating a region. And then we have our facilities like banking facilities, then the provision of services like water supply, wastewater, solid waste. Many a time a solid wastes are dumped outside the city in the regional, in its region or in its hinterland. And then there is also but solid waste treatment facilities with focus on recycling, reuse. Then so all these can be which we what would say as the interaction between city and a region. Now as I said earlier that there is a lot of floating population, and people come to the city or go away from the city. Nowadays, many institutes are located beyond the city in its region. So there is previously there was a inward movement from the region to the city, but now from the city people also move out to its region for education, for the purpose of education. So therefore, there's location of as I said, it reflects in the location of institutes, movement of students, scholars, and then there are also this I would say another parameter for delineation would be the environmental aspects, which because we said that environmental conservation was also a part of regional development or planning. So the purpose of regional development. So we identify the the environmental resources, the watershed areas. Maybe if it's a hill area or if it's where there's a lot of water bodies, water channels. I try to identify the catchment areas, and therefore we see that there are a lot of aspects which go as environmental parameters into that means the landform, the soil cover, then the geology, or as I said, water bodies, then the forest covers, buffer areas. All these can be aspects on which we identify the region and we delineate the region. Going ahead with the other aspects, that is the population growth rate, the percentage of urban population to total population, the migration characteristics, all these are also one of the aspect or a few of the points which need to be considered as a part of socio-economic as a rather an objective for socio-economic development. So we consider it when we try to delineate a region, that what is happening in the region in terms of demographical aspects and in terms of social aspects, in terms of economic aspects. For example, how is the trade happening, wholesale trade, or what are the major existing developments, what are the investment proposals, then what is the percentage of non-agriculture workers to total workers, what is the land ownership like, what is the land utilization like. So all this we generally consider when we when we try to delineate the region. And now what is the process of how do we till now we were talking of the aspects we consider while delineating a region, but let us understand the process of delineation of the region. Now what is the process, how do we go about it? So the first is that we have to have a profile of the region. As I said, all these aspects which have been earlier discussed, which I was just referring to, so that gives us a profile of the region and an analysis of the region. For example, so we identify and map the influence zone around corridors, nodes, priority areas, so counter magnets. So what is happening in the region, and what is the region all about? What are the characteristics of the region, status of the region? That has to be analyzed, or that has to be understood in terms of maybe socio-economic development, in terms of environmental resources, in terms of infrastructure, in terms of demographical characteristics. So all that one has to understand before we go about. Then our next step is doing a land suitability. Which parts of the region are suitable for development? Not the entire region may not be suitable for development. We require to conserve also. So which of these lands are suitable for conservation? Which of the lands suitable for development? So that is our next stage, and that one can only do when we have the characteristics of the region, or the profile of the region, or the database of the region. Then we analyze the potentials and opportunities for development. What sort of potentials and opportunities we have based on the available resources for development. And then we work out the policies, plans, and what are the basically the policies relating to land use, economic development, transportation, all the sectoral policies basically, and then administration, law and order, housing and shelter, as I said, environmental protection of environmental sensitive areas. So all that. So what are the policies and plans? And then we also should. I mean, that's the process, is that we have to also think about the spatial investment plans. That means investments have to be thought of not in terms of money alone, that how many crores of 1,000 crores of rupees are to be spent, but where in the region it has to be spent. So the spatial connotation of investments have to be there, have to be understood, or have to be planned for. And also the institutional framework, that means what would be the governance mechanism in terms of roles and responsibilities of various stakeholders, fund flows mechanisms, monitoring systems, social audits. So this is how a regional development or a regional plan, or we would say the process of any regional development should go about. And then there are various methods, analytical methods. For example, the weighted index method, which determines a homogeneous region without deviations, without variations. And then there is a flow analysis method, and then there is a gravitational analysis method. So the approach in this method of the weighted index number method is talking of identification of the criteria, such as maybe literacy rate, maybe land form. So it can be demographic, it can be environmental, but the aspects can be taken depending upon the context, or depending upon the typology of, or the type of setting, or the depending, as I said, depending upon the context. Is it a hilly area, or is it a coastal area? What sort of characteristics that you have? Is it predominantly an agriculture area? So based on this, one uses this. And next we come to the flow analysis, which identifies the direction and intensity of flows and builds up functional relationship between the center and the surrounding satellite towns. So it is how we can, what would be the flows between, or the connections, or the interdependence between these centers, one can find out. And it also varies with the distance. When the distance between centers increase, maybe the intensity of flows also increase. So this is basically about flow analysis. And the gravitational analysis, as you can see, it identifies the potential flows rather than the actual flows, and it is mathematically represented, where we see that it is about all gravitational force between the towns, and which is related to the population characteristic, the population, the employment, and the income characteristics of the centers, of these two centers which we are talking of, and the distance. As I said earlier, that between two centers, if the distance increases, then the intensity of flow would decrease. So this is all about the classification, characteristics, and the delineation of regions. So dear students, today you learned how the various perspectives, or various criteria of classifying the regions, what are the characteristics of these regions, and the delineation, how do we delineate a region of a city. And that's it. Thank you.